welcome to Cindy V. King channel here. I'm so excited for you to be here. If you are new to my channel, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button, because the more likes and the more shares, I would love to continue on giving you guys these information. So I have a special guest today. I'm really focused on the area of relationship and dating. But today, this is one of my favorite topics, is astrology, and I have a special guest. We're going to be talking about the different type of astrology, in which meaning there's natal astrology and there's horary, and we're going to be focusing on free will and things like that. How, when you are consulting with an astrologer like myself or my special guest today, that's what we're going to be talking about, and how you can benefit knowing your astrology chart, or speaking to an astrologer, and how they can actually help you and deal with certain obstacle that you have in your life. That's including love. So we're going to be doing that today. So my special guest, his name is Robert Glasscock. If you ever have taken his course, he's been doing astrology for 53 years. Isn't that amazing? Like 53 years. He served over 45,000 clients from all over the world. We're talking about 80 countries here. He's based in Los Angeles, and he's been a publisher over 250 words on the annual American Astrology Magazine. I think his knowledge in astrology is phenomenal. Like, it will just blow your mind. So if you don't know what astrology is and you're quite curious, I would recommend you sticking around, just learning about astrology in general. And if you're already an astrology fan, that's great. I practice Vedic astrology, but under a tropical a measurement. So if that's something that resonates with you, if you're wanting to learn new techniques, stay here. We're going to get really technical, and we're going to get very, very philosophy as well. So that being said, he teaches at Kelp College, and it's worldwide audience, and there's 7,000 students, an astrologer, and he really specialized in two areas. One of them is horary astrology. That's what we're going to be talking about. It's one of my favorite astrology. In Persian, it's called Prajna. So that's Prajna astrology, and it's very similar. It's very accurate, and I love it. If you don't have a birth chart, no problem. We're going to be talking about that today. So let's get started. Thank you so much for coming on the show here, and I'm so excited for you to pass on the wonderful knowledge that you are keeping in your mind.
Thank you very much. You're so kind to invite me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's so amazing. So, I really want to talk to you today about two things, and especially about horary, and what's the difference from horary and natal astrology. Can you tell me a little bit about it? So maybe somebody who never have heard of astrology, and they're like, what's natal and what's horary? If you pronounce it wrong, it sounds really bad.
Yes. Well, it's actually the word orary. Notice I make a silent H. I call it orary, so that we don't get it confused with prostitution.
Yes.
The word actually means of the moment. So what it is like the birth horoscope for the moment that the astrologer understands the question that a client is asking. And the difference is that a natal chart, or a birth horoscope, which is what most people think of, is of course the horoscope for the place and time and date that you're born. And it really gives you an amazing overview of your entire life in every department of life, whatever you want to talk about. Whether it's marriage and love, or money, or jobs, or psychology, or friendships and career, on and on and on. So that's a birth horoscope, and it's a wonderful tool to understand yourself. I still do work with psychologists privately because I totally understand psychologists not wanting to publicize or tell their patients and clients they work with an astrologer. But it's a wonderful way to get insights into yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses, and on top of that, timing, which I don't know of any other tool, Cindy, in life. I personally was in a men's psychology group for over a year, and second to astrology, it's the best thing I ever did for myself. I can't recommend that highly enough to people. Um, but astrology gives you the timing of things like nothing else does. Horary astrology is an incredible tool for very specific questions. And I use it for myself, but I use it with clients just about every day. I just had, for example, well, I'll tell you, a couple of years ago, in the middle of the night, I got an email from the mother of one of my students at Kepler College. I teach various courses for Kepler College period. And this was, it was from her mother. And I got the email about 1 a.m. And she said that her father, the mother's father, my student's grandfather, had just been taken to the hospital. He was in intensive care. He had had a major stroke, and she had a brother and sister. The hospital wanted to take the father off of, as I recall it, food and liquid for several days because they wanted to assess what damage had been done to his brain. She, the daughter, or the mother of my student, was afraid if they did that, he would die. The brother and sister were in agreement with the physicians. What could I see? And then she said in the email, if you want, I can get his birth data to you. So I didn't even have the man's birth information. What I did have was the moment that I understood her question, and it's a serious question, obviously. And I didn't want to write her back and say, yes, I'll wait till you find his birth information, which could have taken several days. So I did have the moment where I understood it. And I wrote her back, Cindy, in essence, and I was much more lengthy, I guess, than I'm going to be here. I basically said, he is ready to die. Of the 3 siblings, you are the one that's been closest to him all of your life. And he knows that you're not ready to let him go yet. If it were me, I said, I would put him in hospice care at the hospital immediately. And I would go and get maybe a Japanese rock garden, a rock fountain to put in the room, just a little electric portable one, so that the trickling water would be there in the background to help soothe him, but also any visitors that he has. And I said, basically, I feel like he will be gone within 5 days. Now, that was all without his birth information. It was strictly from the horoscope, the horary chart of the moment that I understood her question. And I was able to write her back immediately with that information and a little bit more. And sure enough, 5 days later, the granddaughter, her daughter, my student, emailed me and said, well, Granddad passed away today, last night, actually. And I was just stunned at how accurate you were, even without having his birth information. And then she said something else to me that meant a lot. She said, my mother also mentioned that you never mentioned anything about money, about payment. Well, how would you, at a time like that, in the middle of the night? And she said she wants to pay you something, which is fine. But that's how useful horary is. Do you see the difference between an overview of a whole lifetime and and looking at it from that versus one question, just very specific focus.
Yeah, when you were telling me that story, I had chills in my back of my spine, and it was like, wow, that's so amazing. And it has changed. Horror in general can change many people's lives. So I use it in my practice, and I love that. It's just in the moment you understand the question, could be actually sent by an email, or it could be verbally as
Yes.
well, right?
Yes.
Does that how it works?
Absolutely. And now for me, this is a completely different example, but it's still horary astrology. I had been leasing a Honda for a year and a half on a 3-year lease. And this was about a year and a half ago. Now, halfway through the lease, I get this letter from Honda to our preferred customers. I mean, yeah, who isn't? We're offering an early termination lease special. You can come in, and for $0 down, you'll drive home in a brand new Honda. Well, I went online and kind of looked up these early termination leases just to see what was going on. And according to Consumer Reports, depending on how you drive and your habits and how long you hold on to cars and so on, they can be very good for the consumer. Well, and that all fit me. So I looked at the horary, and I asked the question, should I take advantage of this early termination lease? That was the first question. The related question is, should I lease this new Honda or buy this new Honda? So that's very pragmatic, those kinds of questions. And it said, buy it. All right, so I went in the next morning, and sure enough, I found exactly the car I wanted. It was the same car I'd been leasing, but just a newer model. And we did all the paperwork. And the head of the finance department had given me, the payments were exactly the same, but it was, I forget, some funny name for a special kind of lease at the end of which I guess I would own. I don't know what it was. Because when I finally went into the actual finance guy's private office, he's looking this over and he says, why are you leasing this instead of buying it? I said, well, that's the way. I guess he wanted to keep my payments the same, and that's how he set it up. And he asked me these questions about my driving habits. He said, you don't want to lease this, you want to buy it. Well, I already knew from astrology that that was absolutely right. So in making those kinds of very practical decisions, I use it not just for myself, but for other people too. So horary is incredibly good at helping those kinds of decisions. If, on the other hand, I was asking about marrying somebody, that's a birth horoscope. You know this. You know, that's a much more in-depth overview of your whole life and personality and so on.
Yes, that's totally true. And I want you, I used to be an accountant. I kind of practiced on and off accounting. And I remember you were mentioning at one point you had a client, they were trying to get pregnant and they had to do fertility treatment. And you know how much those things cost.
Yes.
Quite a bit. And horary has helped them and saved them and also give them timing as well.
That's true, and this works both ways. If the person has their birth information, when you mention that, I actually have a lot of clients who are in that same sort of situation, and I was trying to remember which one. Last year, and in fact, she just had her baby two months ago, but they had been trying to get pregnant for quite a while, and I think they'd gone through 2 treatments, which are here about right around $1,000 each. And she knew her birth time exactly, which kind of surprised me. But I really did have her horoscope. Or I'll tell you what I use, Cindy. There's a wonderful program for the iPhone called Ephemeris. By I believe I can't remember where he's from. He's Clifford Ribaud, Ribaud is the developer's name. It's on the Apple Store. And I heard about it several years ago, 6-7 years ago. It's an amazing program because instantly on your phone, you can have an horary chart for that particular moment, or you can set up somebody's chart and store it forever on your phone. So you've got that portable access. So when she first asked me this, I set up her horoscope, and this is her birth horoscope, and asked her about, I said, have you had any problems with tubular problems, is what I asked her about. And she did have, there was a blockage in one of the tubes. But I said, look, this year coming up is the best year of your life to get pregnant. Now, if you run into some delays or the treatments don't work initially, keep trying. And I think at the latest, you will get pregnant next July, meaning this past July. Well, I ran into her and her husband too, and after the second treatment, they decided to take a break from the treatments. And I remember saying, I'll bet you get pregnant, watch. And sure enough, she did. And they had a baby daughter. So that was with her birth horoscope. I'm right now dealing with another couple, the same thing. This gentleman he had been married before. He had 2 children. He had a vasectomy. They got divorced. Now he's remarried, and they want to have a baby. So he's trying to have the vasectomy reversed and is running into a lot of problems. Aspermatozoa, for one thing, spermatomatic, which is after a vasectomy. If they reverse it sometime, he's got plenty of semen, but no sperm count. So that's the issue. And in that case, I did use horary, just to basically say to him, it looks like you anyway, have you tried this twice to have this reversed? And he said, I'm about to try the second time. And I said, good, keep trying. And by the way, do you have an appointment coming up this next Friday with? So that's horary astrology. The only reason that you ask those kinds of questions, it makes you sound like a fortune teller. But what you're really doing is trying to assess how accurate that horoscope is. If he had said, no, I don't have an appointment with the doctor to discuss this next Friday, that's fine. That's a piece of information that I can store away, meaning be a little careful on timing with this particular horoscope. But that's why you do that. So out of just that one question, he decided he wanted a full reading with me, which we did. And he's become fascinated with astrology. He's got a very scientific brain, and he said, I can't believe you can be this specific with this stuff.
Yeah, and I love, that's so amazing what horary could do. If I cast a chart right now, I should be able to identify the lagna, which is the ascendant, what shirt your color is, or what shirt you're wearing, or what color your glasses. And people get spooked out about that because because I have to confirm if this horary chart is usable. And there's time that horary chart can't be used.
And the horary chart, as you know, because you do astrology, will tell you, for example, if the first 3 degrees of the sign is rising or the last 3, you can't read the chart. If Saturn is in the 7th house, you can't, under certain circumstances you can, but they have to be very specific. So there's several ways that a horoscope will actually tell you it's too soon to know. There's not enough information. The person doesn't have enough information, nor do you as the astrologer, to really render a judgment here. Try again later. Or conversely, this situation is basically all but over. There's not a thing that the client can do about it. So astrology really is going to be useless. So within those parameters, and of course you don't give them a reading, nor do you charge any money because you can't read the chart. So it even built into astrology are these kinds of safeguards.
No, it's very true. And that actually happened a few times. I cast my own chart. I'm like, I can't read my own horary chart. And I was like, what's going on? Right. So, and I guess, I have learned through Vedic astrology that the person who's asking the question has to be emotionally invested. If they are not emotionally invested, is the chart still readable or not? Or still impactful?
You're absolutely right. They have to be not just emotionally invested, which is true. they have to be directly involved. In other words, you cannot ask horary astrology who's going to win the election.
Yes.
Because, yes, each vote counts, but any one individual has no direct bearing on who's elected president of the United States. You can certainly consult mundane astrology to ask that kind of question, but you're right. Unless a person has some direct connection to the question, um, then you really are on thin ice. Now, by direct connection, if a parent asks about a child's situation, they obviously have a direct investment in that child's well-being, so there you can do it. But the other rule of thumb in astrology, when people are asking, what is somebody else going to do
Mm.
in the then you begin to get on real thin ice. Astrology, horary is great for this. For example, if someone comes to me and they say, I had a terrific job interview. I really need this job. Can you see anything about it? Horary, if you can read that chart, will tell you flat out. It looks very now you cannot say what the employer is going to do, but you can say this looks very favorable. It also is a situation where if you have not heard back from them in 2 weeks, you don't have to be aggressive or assertive about it. Just let them know you're interested to know if they've made a decision yet. You can write them, you can phone them, you can drop by, but take some assertive action to just let them know that you're very interested. Other times you can say, it looks favorable, but it's telling you to be very patient. Don't come across as panicked. Let them get in touch with you, not the other way around. So you can get that kind of information.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that really broadened the astrology in a way that it makes sense to people. And I know there's a few type of techniques, and one of them is horary, and there's one of them is called event, or we call it in Vedic it's muhurta.
Yes.
So like I went on, like for example, you go on a date for somebody, you wanted to know if it's going to pursue yes or no. Though that's a little bit different. Can you explain a little bit more on that, Robert?
Well,
how does that work versus with horary?
You mean event charts?
Yeah.
Because the situation that you just gave, when you go on a date, and we have all done this, any of us who are astrologers are interested in astrology, of course we do. A first date is, hopefully, it's going to be a lot of fun, but there's no commitment involved at that stage of the game. That's why it's ruled by the fifth house, Cindy, because that house has to do with just sheer pleasure. And it has to do, the fifth house really on a little deeper level, has to do with our projection of ourselves into the future without consideration for what other people want for us or think for us. It's what we want. It's how we want to go in life. And it rules, oddly enough, pleasure. It rules sex without responsibility, which is a different sector of the horoscope. So a first date is really and the fifth house rules speculation. So it rules the stock market. It rules anything that we are gambling on, and that's a first date. So you can look at a chart for a first date, an event chart, and you can see whether it's fun or not so fun, or whether he picks up the tab or he tells her he left his credit cards at home. But it doesn't really give you that much. If a person's been dating for a little bit, now you have something to go on, but that's not an event chart. Now suddenly you have a reason to look at the two birth horoscopes to see if there's any real long range possibility and long range significant here, because they really are periods. Cindy, I don't know about you, But I've certainly been in situations where I will meet somebody and they're just electrifying. You know, you get that feeling, that incredible rush. Almost inevitably, um, those kinds of feelings are under the planet Uranus, which is called the awakener. I don't know about in Vedic, but certainly in Western astrology. And it's a very electrifying planet. The person that stimulates those kinds of electrical feelings in us is in our lives for a reason, but probably only temporarily. Very often they just seem to appear out of nowhere and they're gone just as unexpectedly. So marriage potentials in that kind of a relationship are not great. But my God, do they change you and awaken something in you that's wonderful. And that's why you feel so good when you meet somebody like that. They may not be around to see their effects on you, but you'll never forget them. So that's one kind of relationship. Other kinds are, and two people can meet and begin to get involved, and you can see that one of them um, is is either having difficulties committing to a relationship at that point in their life, or it may be that their whole life is commitment phobic, and there really are such people. People that feel trapped in commitments, and therefore they will unconsciously make choices that either keep them free or push the other person away. And if that's a life trait, a psychological trait that they've never dealt with or don't even acknowledge, it can be a big problem. Which is why, people seem to be one thing when we first meet them and you think, gee, how wonderful, I love her, or he's such a great guy. And then you get involved, you get married and find out, oh my gosh, they're cheaters, they're lying to me, they're not taking care of financial, all those things can be hidden on first dates.
That is so true. That's especially maybe you're talking about a Scorpion with a Saturn in there.
All right. Well, Scorpio, are you a Scorpio? I've forgotten.
No, I'm a ascendant wise, I'm a Taurus ascendant.
Okay. What's your sun sign?
My sun sign is I'm actually a cuss, so Gemini.
Gemini Cancer?
No, Gemini Taurus.
Okay.
Yes.
No, when you mentioned Scorpio, I love the sign. It's everybody laughs because it's supposed to, and it does. It rules sex, and everybody thinks Scorpios are sexy as hell. But it's a fascinating sign. It's one of the deepest signs, and they're the most private sign. It's amazing the depths that Scorpio people have. They tend not to open up to everybody. I mean, they seem to be, but they are very private. They don't let just anybody get very close to them. And on the other hand, people open up to Scorpios within 5 minutes. They're telling them things they wouldn't tell anybody else. I don't know what that is, but Scorpio brings that out in people. But they are, if they love you, they love you. And they may not say it more than about once, right at the beginning of the relationship, but they do. They absolutely love you. Other signs, tell you every day they love you, and yet sometimes you wonder.
Yeah, so that being said, like even horary can tell if you're, well, I try not to make the sad channel, but if you are with a partner who is cheating, you can see that as well.
Yes, you can.
It's in the 12th house, and there's other factors in there as well. And I want you to talk about more of like horary. There's rulers, right? So the man could be Mars, could be the trouser, and the sun could be his body or his personality, right? And the woman. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, I'll tell you, there's an interesting technique that combines horary and natal astrology. And there was an early 20th century Boston American astrologer named Evangeline Adams who popularized this technique. It had been around long before her. But what you do, for example, and I use it I use it in every reading.
Mm-hmm.
You set up it's like an horary chart for the moment and for the location where the astrologer is. But you plug in to that chart the client's birth chart. So the house cusps in that horary chart absolutely tell you what's going on with that person, but putting their birth planets in there instead of the transiting planets tells you where their life is at the moment. And you can read that chart. It's called a consultation chart. And you can read it just like an horary chart, including using horary timing and so on, which is different than natal astrology. So it's a fascinating mix of the two. And I was reading for a man not long ago and in California, and I had read for him several years ago, and I remember using this method, Cindy. He's a Leo, and when I plugged his birth planets into this horoscope, his natal Pluto was rising right on the ascendant, and I said, I thought both of your parents were dead already, and he said they are, and I said, well, is somebody around you is dying, right? Or is somebody around you dying? He said no. So we kept talking, and about 30 minutes into the conversation, he said, wait a minute, just a minute, I'll be right back. So he went and did something and came back, and he said, I'm sorry, my girlfriend's father is very sick and dying. He's in the bedroom. And I said, isn't that what I just asked you at the start of this? Isn't somebody around you dying? He completely, because I guess I'd mentioned his parents or something. So it can be that specific. It's a wonderful combination, though, of horary and natal.
Yeah, it's a very popular use, and I find it's very accurate and it very, what do you call it? Relevant to them, very specifically what's going on in their current time. We can talk about natal, which is the birth chart, and the birth chart on its own. When you read the birth chart, it tells you a few things, not only the personality, right? And there's free will, and there's the one isn't. Are you actually destined to be that type of person or go through all this difficulty, whatever Saturn is doing to you, whatever Uranus is doing to you, or Pluto?
Well, I love your question about, or just not a question, bringing up free will. In fact, this man that was having the reversal of the vasectomy, when I had written him back, I was so specific with some of the things that I said to him. And he said, now, and his wife had asked the same thing. Well, now, is this fate or do we have free will? And I wrote him back. And here's what my experience over 53 years, it is all free will. It is all free will from even before we're born, to me. There's a reason to incarnate physically, or there are reasons, plural. So we can all either gnash our teeth and wail that we got lousy parents, or we can thank the stars that we have great parents. But those two were choices before we were born, made by free will. Now, people have a lot of trouble with some aspects of this. I think, though, in my experience, what the horoscope shows you, the Earth is in the center of the horoscope, so it's looking out from the center, and we're looking out. And as we turn around, here's what's on the eastern horizon when we were born, where the sun rises. And here's what was setting over in the west, and so on. Here's what was directly overhead. It's not that these planets and the sun and the moon have any mystic rays that make us do anything. I really believe in what psychiatrist Carl Jung, who was a contemporary of Freud's and who studied astrology and used it, he called this synchronicity. It's not that the planets cause anything, it's that they are synchronous with events on Earth, so that in very ancient days, when this was all beginning, people noticed, gee, when Mars rises with the vernal equinox, we tend to have wars. All right, so they made a note. And that's how the synchronicity between planetary positions and earthly events began to be collated, if you will. So my understanding of this at this point is that these planets are basically archetypes. There's an archetype for security, for example, that's the moon. We all have needs for security. We need shelter, we need food, we need clothing. That's the moon. The archetype for the life force, the reason that we are here, and the thing that gives us vitality is the season of the year that we were born in, the sun. It's the life force. And people are different depending on the time of year that they're born in. Most of us have needs for love. And part of that, the love part of that, is Venus. It's the law of attraction, Venus. It's that archetype. Many of us, most of us, have a need for sex, which is a different thing than love. It can certainly go together, but the sexual, physical side of love, lust, is Mars. Mars also rules action. We all have a need to act, to take actions. So how we act and where we act is Mars. It's that archetype. But what these signs correspond to me, as you know, the house cusps symbolize different divisions in life: money, finances, health, job, love, marriage, and so on. The signs on the house cusp, I think, synchronize with what a person's belief systems are about that area of life. So if you have, let's say, Saturn or Capricorn on the seventh cusp, it can mean a number of things at different ages, but one of the things it can mean is that marriage for that person, they believe, marriage is going to be a Saturnian, Capricornian kind of experience in life. So that's what, because they believe that, and were conditioned to believe it because of their birth circumstances, they will gravitate toward Capricornian, Saturnian types of marriage experiences. That's not fate so much as the natural end result of their belief systems. So if you are in a situation in life that is frustrating to you or challenging or depressing or anything else, you can ask yourself, what in my belief systems has contributed to this? Because you can change your belief systems. And when you do that, it takes a little work, it takes some consciousness, it takes some psychology, but you can do it. And when you begin to change your core beliefs about yourself, the outer results change naturally. So that, in effect, is like changing your fate. And I really have seen this. Your horoscope tells you exactly what your life experiences will be if you do nothing about it. You see what I mean? But the minute you take conscious action, you begin to change those things. It took me, Cindy, I'm speaking way too much here. I was probably 45 years old and had been doing astrology professionally since I was 20 before I fully understood about me that I am a solitaire by nature. I'm a Libra. So when I got into astrology, Libra was all about love and marriage, and oh boy, was I. This was, the 60s in Los Angeles, and sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And Libra, and I was in the arts and in television and movies. And so, of course, sex, drugs, and rock and roll and movies, I was in heaven. But relationships, I happen to have Saturn on my seventh cusp in a grand cross with my sun-moon opposition. I'm telling you this because you'll understand it. And Saturn directly opposite my ascendant. And I teach this in my classes sometimes. I'll say, look at this man's chart. There are only two things in his life that he truly loves. What are they? Well, you look to see where Taurus and Libra are, Cindy, because they're Venus ruled. Taurus is on my fifth house. Yes, I like sex, but more than that, it was my creativity. It's that fifth house. And Venus, which rules Taurus, is elevated in my 10th house of career. So yes, I've made a career out of my creativity. The other thing I love is where Libra is. It's on my midheaven, which is my career. So this guy loves two things, his creativity and his career. And if somebody else doesn't directly fit into those two things, or at least one of them, he unconsciously resents the time that they take. And so he will either choose people who will leave him, or he will behave in ways that push other people away. So the longest relationships I've had in my life are about 4 to 5 years. That seems to be my limit. And when I was about 45 and finally realizing to that kind of depth the truth about myself, I thought, my God, that's so, I had never understood it before at that level. But those are the things I do love in my life. And so, yes, I love love and I love to be in love, but I love these things more. And that was hard to admit when I was younger. Now, not so hard. But it's that kind of self-awareness, that while we're on this subject, I'm thinking about, I get asked pretty frequently, and it just happened last week at dinner with a dear friend of mine. She's been married and lost her husband about 10 years. She said to me, "Are you ever lonely?" And I said, "No, I'm really not. And I never have been. A lot of what I do in my life is alone. Writing is certainly alone. Now, counseling clients is with another person. And my alone time is very rich and very rewarding. And I've never been lonely. So I don't really know. And the other thing is, I've really never been depressed. There was one period for about 3 years after leaving Los Angeles, in fact, and thank God for astrology, that I was clinically depressed. But I knew what it was, and I knew where transiting Saturn was, and I knew when this was going to be over, and I knew why I was depressed. To the point where I mentioned to my doctor, and he said, "Oh, I'm going to put you on Paxil." So this is 20 years ago or something, and he said, "Take one, and if you think that's too much, take a half." Well, I took one and I didn't like it at all. And the second day I took a half and I thought, I don't like this at all. Threw them away. It was like living in neutral to me. It had nothing to do with taking a pill. You may as well be drinking or doing drugs. It's the same thing. So at that point, I thought, no, I understand what this is. And it was a really challenging time in my life. I had lost my condo in the earthquake in Los Angeles, on and on and on. So there were some big things going on. And that's as close as but I've never been depressed on a sustained kind of level. My sister, on the other hand, is a psychologist and a Cancerian and is bipolar. And she had a benign brain tumor several years ago. And she told me then that to do the operation, they had to take her off of her medications because apparently it disguised the brain tissue. And she said, "Bob, I have never been so depressed in my life." Well, Cindy, only because of that experience I had did I really finally understand a little bit of what that must be to be that depressed. But I have to tell you, the fact that I'm not depressed, I think is all due to astrology. Thank God it found me when I was very young, and it made sense to me. It worked right away for me, and it's always been there to help make sense out of what's going on in my life, and also to help guide me through, the normal challenges and so on that life brings. So I think I'm in perfect health. I'm 73. My doctor is a woman from India, from Jaipur. And when I first brought up astrology to her, there was a young Western intern in the office with her. at the end of the exam, and she said, "Is there anything else?" And I said, "No, we've looked at everything I know to look at." By then, I'd been with her for a year or so, except my heart. She'd never. She said, "There's nothing wrong with your heart. Why do you ask?" And I said, "Well, I've been an astrologer for over 50 years," and she didn't even let me finish, Cindy. She said, "Oh, that's so interesting because when I was a girl in Jaipur, I was 15. My astrologer told me about my right eye. He told me about my ovaries." And this young Western intern is looking at us like we have lost our minds. But a lot of that, when I was in my young 20s, I mentioned to a doctor, again, just getting a physical, that I was an astrologist, and he didn't scoff. He said, "Really? Well, what does your horoscope have to say about your health?" I said, "Well, frankly, it says that I'm diabetic." And he stopped cold. He said, "You're kidding." I said, "No, am I?" He said, "Well, not quite, but your blood sugar is right on the line between high normal and diabetic. So if you know that about yourself, it would," well, you see what I mean? That's an example of astrology at work.
I love it. I love it. It works on myself as well. So I'm going through my own medical health as well. So we all have that. So it has been very beneficial. And I know that how horror could serve so many people out there, even though if they don't have their natal chart, they could actually save money on relationships that's no longer, or being in a relationship is really negative or not serving them. It all really shows up. And when is the exit point? I think it's more, astrology, I find it's more of the healing path. When are we, I think people